Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bronx Book Festival. My name is Shaughnessy Miller. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm really excited to welcome you to the Horror is for the Girlies panel, because it is. All the girlies love horror. I'm really excited to introduce our moderator, Mia Garcia Peña, and they're going to introduce themselves, and all the panelists are going to introduce themselves. So thank you all for being here.
Hello. Do I have to grab this? I'm going to be difficult. Thank you for joining us. We are going to introduce ourselves for the Horrors for the Girlies panel. I'm going to go last because I'm the moderator, so. Kalynn.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Cottingham, and I am the author of This Delicious Death and My Dearest Darkest, both of which are sapphic horror. My first book is about some girls accidentally summoning a creature at their boarding school, and the second book is about cannibal girls at Coachella who kiss each other and eat boys.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vincent Tirado. I'm the author of Burn Down, Rise Up, and We Don't Swim Here. Burn Down, Rise Up is about a group of friends in the Bronx who get transported into a hellish underworld, and they're trying to fight their way out. We Don't Swim Here is about a pair of cousins who are unearthing a very strange mystery and the reason behind a curse that's fallen over the entire town.
So light reads, both of them. So I figured we should start off with the eternal question of why horror? Like, what does horror allow us to do? Also, I should introduce myself. I'm already failing at this. And take two. I'm Garcia Peña, also published as Mia Garcia, and I had a short story in the Latine horror anthology Our Shadows Have Claws, which is 50 Latine YA authors interpreting monsters and horror across Latin America. Mine was set in Puerto Rico. So back to the horror question, which is, what is it about horror that allows us to perhaps like talk about marginalizations in different ways, intersections, like how does it allow us to explore different parts of our existence, and just in general, like, why do you love horror?
I personally was drawn to horror a little bit by accident, where originally I very much viewed horror as being something that only cishet white dudes write. So I didn't feel particularly welcome in the genre, but as time has gone on, I feel like we've been able to welcome a lot more people into the horror genre who are able to write stories that you can write in a contemporary setting, but in a way I think it has a little bit more bite, pun intended, if you have the opportunity to sort of tell it through horror tropes and show it to people in a way that they might not necessarily be thinking about the subject. So, for example, This Delicious Death is about people who have an illness that turns them into flesh-eating ghouls, and it's a very, very thinly veiled metaphor for queer and trans issues. That I was able to talk about through the metaphor of cannibalism, which was really fun and also like gratifying to be able to explore.
I started off in horror just kind of having fun with it, just kind of enjoying myself. And over time, you know, as you like keep writing horror and kind of studying it, you do start to pick out like all the little details that make up like the entire story and what the meaning behind them are. So like I'm a big fan of like ghost stories, but like a regular ghost story is vastly different from like Candyman, which, you know, is predicated upon like years, like just several years of you know, black trauma and just, you know, black horror. So I got into horror a lot more because it allowed me to kind of highlight the issues that I feel like a lot of the genre kind of shy away from. And I think it kind of does it a little bit disservice when it does that. So this is like why I write horror.
And I think you can definitely tell in like movies and books that are aware of how horror can shed light to different intersections by how well they continue to come back year after year, and like are seeing one of those like classic horror movies like The Thing, like when you don't know if the person next to you has been like, is a monster from outer space, or is it really a husky? Who knows? I would say that I got into horror by not being allowed to watch it. Like any teenager or any middle grade, I was like 8 years old. Let's be clear. Watching like Chucky and Child's Play, and then having to lock all of my dolls in the closet because I was for sure going to be like killed in the middle of the night by my Barbies. But anyway, that is the Barbie 2 movie that'll be coming out next year.
I feel like you could really do something with the dolls stuck in the closet, metaphor-wise.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Let's see. Actually, I was wondering, like, thinking about how you all got into horror, is there, like, a book or a film that really stands out to you in your, like, was a formative piece of media that was like, yeah, this is where I want to be, this is what I want to do, and this is how I can play with that?
Yeah, I was a very big fan of, like, watching horror movies on those, like, you can only watch for 60 minutes at a time sort of websites when I was a teenager. And then you'd have to take a break, and then you could watch the other half of the movie. But through that, I was able to discover movies like Jennifer's Body and Ginger Snaps, which are female-led horror with very intense, sinister, sapphic vibes, which is very much the path that I like to tread. And so those were big influential works for me. But the issue that I found with them is they very much had the sort of like villainized queer people, where I wanted to more so take it from the perspective of like having queer heroes as opposed to just having them be like monsters who stab people with, you know, what was it, a box opener in Jennifer's Body?
There wasn't really a specific moment that was just like, oh yes, this is what I want to do forever. It was just kind of like, oh, this is what I want to do right now. And then like afterwards, like, okay, this is also what I want to do right now. And it just kind of kept happening over and over again. But like that question actually reminded me of the first time I ever watched a horror movie. And it was, I was in daycare. I was in daycare, and I think like probably like 5 years old or so. And in daycare, we had like this basement that, like the basement had a stage and everything. We regularly used it for like parties, you know, whatever. Like, so, and then one day, all the daycare like workers were just like, all right, hey everyone, we're gonna, you know, have a movie night. We're gonna go down to the basement, and we're like, oh yeah, a movie, whatever. And then we go down, and they're just like, all right, guys, we're gonna watch It. And the only thing I knew about it, like I saw like the cover of like the VHS tape, and I'm just kind of like, oh, this looks like one of those boring dramas, like, because I did not know what it was about whatsoever. And then we started watching it, and then I got super sucked in, but in a way that's just kind of like, this is gonna leave devastating scars like for the rest of my life. And then afterwards, you know, they're just like, it was like It Chapter 1, so they're like, okay, we're gonna watch It Chapter 2 another day. And we never did, and I think it's because someone complained to the parents, because I was not sleeping.
I had a similar experience, but it was in school, and it was not a horror movie. It was just highly inappropriate for like 11-year-olds. And then, yeah, we were not allowed to watch the rest of that film. But actually, I had a question that you brought up, villains and the role of monsters and villains classically in horror, but how you shifted it. I don't want to spoil anything about your novels, but could you talk a little bit about how you played with the idea of villains and monsters and shifted it in this particular novel? I'm sorry. I know I should have sent these in advance, but
So specifically in This Delicious Death, a lot of what I was trying to do was to take the trope of like the villainized queer person, but flip it such that like the cannibal girls are the heroes of the story, even if what they do is kind of reprehensible. So very much that sort of thing where it's like, if you think that we're monsters, then sure, I'll make us literal monsters, and I can still prove to you that even if that were the case, we're still people who like care for each other, who have found family, who would absolutely like be these ride or die people, even if what you see is something that you have a hard time tolerating. So it was essentially being able to humanize the monster in such a way that people realize, like, oh, perhaps the issue is with me and not with them.
So I really love ghost stories, and I tend to find myself like rooting for the ghost. Like in any time it's like, oh, this is a vengeful ghost, and I'm like, hell yeah, revenge, let's go. Like you gotta let them know, like, just because you're dead doesn't mean they can't still catch these hands. But like in movies, they don't really like allow you to root for the ghost. Like the ghost is bad, they're supposed to move on, etc. And I'm just like, man, like, what if the ghost is right, though,
I always assume the ghost is right.
Right? Like, yeah, it's just kind of like, listen, if something was so bad that you literally cannot move on from, like, this, like, you want to stay in a world where you have to pay taxes? No, something really bad happened. Like, I would be out of this world if I could. But, like, I kind of played
around. They hit you with the ghost taxes.
Yeah. So yeah, I played around with like, okay, this is gonna be a ghost story. This is just, we have like this very vengeful ghost that like has, a powerful curse over the town, and it like pretty much affects how they sort of go about their day-to-day lives. And everyone is like, not that everyone's a villain, but everyone has some level of culpability.
Yeah.
In like how they try to bury the story of this ghost, and like, or maybe they don't actually know, but they just kind of regurgitate all the things that they hear. And so like there is definitely like an actual villain, but I won't spoil it for you. But yeah, I decided, okay, I'm gonna have a ghost story. The ghost is gonna be right. And everyone's just gonna have to, deal with that. That's fine. It's my book. And that was just how I dealt with it. Yeah.
I agree. I am very much always like, this ghost probably has a point. Like, if you all just stopped for a second and just left it alone. So speaking about, you mentioned traditions and stories, and horror is very famously referential and constantly references itself and references its peers and posters on the walls and movies, et cetera, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit about the references, both in terms of storytelling, like you have a lot of historical references in terms of the way Black people were treated in pools and such like that. So not just historical references, but also horror references that would have played, sort of like your horror playlist for this book. Like, what are you referencing that people would find? I already gave you one, Vincent.
I guess. Jesus, that's a good.
Like, what did you want to, when you were building this, you're like, I want to put a little bit of this in, I want to put a little bit of this in.
I mean, okay, so my inspiration behind this was I had watched the reboot of Candyman, and so I was very much into how, like, okay, we've taken the story of a young Black man who was lynched, and we're gonna make it into like an urban legend of some sort. And so I was very much into how they took, one part of like Black horror, like one part of history, and then they just layer it with more and more urban legends, more and more scares, all of those things. Because the one thing that also keeps happening in ghost stories is like they don't just. How do I phrase this in the way that I need to? I'm losing my train of thought. Anyways, ghosts couldn't be right. That's my 2 cents. The ghosts are probably right. Just leave them alone. At this point, they had a rough life. You got to give it to them.
And they're stuck in that life.
Repetition. Yeah, but for Candyman, I was just like, okay, I like the visuals of like, okay, these hives. For We Don't Swim Here, I was like, I like the visuals of pools and lakes and just like a lot of water, and there's a lot of drowning in We Don't Swim Here, especially, which is very strange when no one can go swimming. How do you drown on dry land, And so that was, it wasn't so much of this like image that I want people to have, more of like this feeling of like, okay, at any point this ghost can come for you, and like you have to ask yourself, did you deserve it?
Most likely, to be fair.
So I'm a big fan of very campy horror movies. Horror comedy is very much my sort of wheelhouse, I would say, because I think the two hardest things to do in a book are to scare people and to make people laugh. And so I find it really rewarding to get to encompass both genres in one. So in terms of references that I make, I definitely pulled from not only like those teen slasher flicks like Scream and Jennifer's Body, like I said before, but also I very much got inspiration from all of the Fire Festival documentaries that came out, like, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Because it made such a good setting for a book. I had, like, never read a book that took place at a music festival, and I was like, that is the absolute perfect place to strand people, because everyone is dumb, everyone is on drugs. It's like, it's such a good sort of, not quite a bottle episode, but it is a really good way to like turn up the emotions of the situation while still having it be this sort of like high profile setting.
Okay, I want to amend my previous statement.
Yes,
okay.
Go ahead.
Because when you said playlist, I was like, oh yeah, I made a playlist for my book. You can find the playlist on my website. I'm sorry. But there's this one song on the playlist that, so anytime like Jordan Peele puts out a movie, he's always putting a song, like a really creepy song. So for Candyman, it was Say My Name, right? By Destiny's Child. For We Don't Swim Here, there's this one song called, I think it's called Wait a Minute, Mr. Postman. By the Marvelettes, and it was just like, this black group like back in the 60s, and so like that's like the top of the playlist, but throughout the book you'll see like some like short references to it that's just like, okay, this ghost keeps saying something about a postman, where's the postman going, and then they find out, like, oh wait, that's the song from the 60s, hold up, we got to go back and see what happened in the 60s to this ghost. So yeah, that's like one inspiration I took. It's just like, okay, if we take like a really cheerful song, how do I make this creepy?
You slow it down. Give it a beat.
Have you tried a piano version?
Also, for the writers in attendance, make sure to quote songs that are in the public domain, unless you want to pay somebody to feature the lyric on there. I learned that the hard way.
I had to cut it down by a lot because they were just like, we can't pay for this. I'm like, that's fair. All right, I'll throw the reference in there some other way.
We don't know who to pay for this. Actually, probably should say something about myself. I keep forgetting to do that. So my short story, it's called La Boca del Lobo, which in Puerto Rico, it's funny because it's not really a monster. Everybody else in the anthology did a monster, and I made a monster out of a saying, of a phrase that is used in Puerto Rico, which is más oscuro que la boca de un lobo, which is often said when the lights go out or there are street lamps that are out, and it's like just a very pocket of shadows right there that you can't really see anything in. And my short story was like, well, what is that? What if that pocket of shadow is alive? And what that relationship would be. And it kind of first started out as a romance, because I kind of dig that. And then my first draft of it was apparently like someone had like taken LSD and put it down in like a 10-page short story, and someone was like, you have to have a plot, and I was like, do I? Can it just be about hanging out with this shadow creature? And they're like, no. So there were weaves of family and generational trauma, as we do, and in terms of references, I would say probably like Guillermo del Toro, like a lot of like creepy, but also kind of like enticing, like you would absolutely follow whatever is calling you into the dark, and you'd be like probably be happy for it. So that's kind of what La Boca del Lobo was and is. Okay, so my next question is, because both of your novels have a lot of mystery and things that need to be solved. As a person who is terrible at plot, I will just come out and say that. How do you keep all of that together? I know at the end of your acknowledgments, you said that you used to call your mom and yell about how you were just like not going to write this book anymore.
It got real for a minute there.
It's in the acknowledgments. I'm just gonna. As a writer, how are you keeping all of these threads together, and also keeping the tension of the mystery, of the horror of everything together? Please tell me how to do it.
Sure. So the way that I typically approach plots, especially with horror, is you're trying to ramp up, but do it slowly. So it's like you introduce the setting, the characters, and everything when everything is cool. and then slowly you start seeing those little twinges of like, hold on, I think something's wrong here. So, for example, towards the beginning of This Delicious Death, like, we're just having a fun time. We're putting the flesh cooler in the Mini Cooper. Everything is super chill. But then we get to the
flesh cooler is such an interesting phrase.
The flesh cooler made it onto the cover, which is my favorite throwaway joke I've made. But as they're like checking into their cabin at the festival, it's like, oh, that's weird. It looks like there's bones nearby with like this weird liquid on them. I wonder what could be going on with that. Well, we're here to have fun. Let's not think too hard on it. And then they should have thought a little harder on it because things continue to escalate. But it is just sort of like introducing that creeping sense of dread as the book continues, and then being able to really go all out with it at the end of the book to be like, you are now face to face with the monster and also with like the consequences of your actions.
So I have to do a different approach when it comes to planning my books. I kind of look at a calendar and I say, okay, what is the time frame that this entire book is happening in, you know? Because then that kind of drastically changes. Like, okay, is it a Friday? Cool, they're in school right now. Is it a Saturday? All right, they can be anywhere on a Saturday. You know, what does that look like for them? And so I kind of look at, from a day-to-day perspective, like what would the characters be doing at a particular moment that, like, one, it continues the story. Like, I don't want to like drop the story dead or like, oh, well, now we have to go to social studies. It's like, no one's gonna read that. But also making it realistic, because I think we were talking earlier about like, oh, what do you do with the parents of a book? And it's just like, you have to make an excuse for them not to be there because otherwise nothing will happen. And so that's just how I think of like, okay, what is reasonable, but also what will keep the story interesting? And I just kind of move forward from there.
In that vein, at one point, would you have, if you were in these books, at one point, would you have been like, I'm going to go home. I'm not going to participate in this. Like, please continue with your haunting and your ghoulish behavior. I'm going to be home in my pajamas, like, watching Netflix if my account hasn't been turned off because my parents own the account.
Password sharing, please allow it.
Stop your nonsense.
Yeah,
Netflix.
this is the social issue I'd really like to talk about today is password sharing. So, unfortunately, I am a dumb white person. I'd be there till the end. I'd probably like get eaten on page like 150, and I would have been like, "Ah, darn." That's on me.
Are you live streaming it on Instagram? I was like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah. I'd be like, why is this person chewing on my arm? That's wild, guys,
so
right? So, like, I would for sure die in one of my books.
I have a different answer depending on the book. So for Burn Down, Rise Up, I would never have done that dumb shit no matter what. Because the whole story predicates on you have to get on a subway at 3 a.m. You have to do this spooky ritual like you're in a creepypasta story. And, you know, that's how you get transported. I would never be on a train at 3 a.m. I'm not even awake at 3 a.m. Like, it's like, oh, your cousin went missing. Damn, that's crazy. I'm going to bed. Like, that's... like, I would never be part of that. I don't care if my mom's also in a coma, because that does happen in the book. But, like, I was...
Sorry that happened to you, but I'm different.
But I'm like, sorry, Mom, like, you're a Christian, it's fine, you'll go to heaven. I'm just gonna, I have another parent to live with, I guess.
Dang.
For the first book, at least. So the second book, it's like, you're not really doing anything. There's no, like, way to, you can't, like, beckon the ghost to come to you unless you, like, I don't know, went backwards into the 60s and, like, also decided to, like, you know, fight her or something like that. That being said, I would be there to the end in the second book because it's much lower stakes, in my opinion, because I didn't do anything to this ghost. They're not mad at me. Like, they're not mad at me. They're just kind of like, I'm just trying to do some revenge. You know, you want to help me? And I'm just like, yeah, of course, I'm down. Like, I don't even care what happened. Just let me help you with your revenge.
Like, what do you need, research? Yeah, I could do some research. Let's go.
And like the second, you know, and We Don't Swim Here, it's just kind of like, you know, oh, my cousin is like is trying to keep me out of it. And it's just like, I'm chismosa. You're not keeping me from anything. I got to know what's happening. So yeah, I would have been there to the end in the second book. In the first book, the story would have been way different. Like, nothing would have happened.
Do you feel if Anais had just told Bronwyn everything from the beginning, nothing would have actually been like, oh, okay, I guess. Like, would it have gone that deep into it if we were honest?
I think that's a good question. Okay, so Oh, it is windy.
The wind is trying to tell us something.
Yeah.
We should understand.
Special guest, the wind.
Shifting the question so that
Yeah.
nature is not angry at us. Sorry, continue.
I mean, okay. The issue with so Anais doesn't tell Bronwyn anything because she has this belief that the more you are aware of something, the more it's aware of you. And so she's also, in her own way, trying to protect Bronwyn. She's just like, I don't want a family member of mine to get hurt, even if my cousin is annoying as hell. So she could tell her, but then she runs the risk of damn, now this ghost is probably gonna be keeping an eye on her, and I don't know if the ghost wants at this point in time. So that probably is not ideal either.
Do y'all remember the first Bronx Book Festival where it was raining and it was this windy? No?
was not here.
Shelley's right over there. Yeah. We all hid in the Chipotle. It's flashbacks right now. I really like that. The more that you're aware of something, the more that is aware of you. Because I definitely used a little bit of that in the short story, where the more she's aware of things that appear to be looking at her, the more that they become something looking at her, and all that creepiness. I don't know if you've ever been in the mountains of Puerto Rico, but it is very easy to get lost, even though you think you have a sense of direction, and that you somehow can identify hoof prints in the ground. I don't know why I thought about that.
Yeah, and it's also that because We Don't Swim Here is set in a small town. I asked a couple of my friends who do live in small southern towns, and they said, yeah, there's absolutely some weird shit that happens, and you just kind of ignore it. Oh, you saw something weird outside your window? No, you didn't. Close the blinds. So for Anais, who's just yeah, I know all the things that's happening out the window, but I'm not gonna. I'm not looking at it.
We
it's
don't
fine.
talk about it.
Yeah, let's not talk about it, and it will be fine.
Yeah. I'm on. I end up on these amazing TikTok things like Appalachian TikTok, and yes, thank you. Who are always if you hear whistling at night, no, you didn't. And I was like, no, I did not.
Did you see
what?
the Latinos Against Spooky shit?
Yeah.
TikTok.
They're good evening, senor. Do not go down those stairs. I was like, do not go down those stairs. What are you doing? Just let the Ring record everything and go home. Throw.
That's an actual TikTok account. It's called Latinos Against Spooky Shit. That's just look that up. It's so funny.
Oh my God. Okay, forgot my train of thought here. So I wanted to chat a little bit about. Actually, I'm gonna leave this one to the end. I don't think we heard enough about what your novels are about. We only got a little sentence. So I was wondering if you can sell them to the audience essentially, so they should buy your books. So you can get a little deep dive of your story instead of just a one sentence thing.
Sure. So This Delicious Death is about a group of girls who have all been through this worldwide cataclysmic event called the Hollowing that has left 1% of the population as flesh-eating ghouls. And it's been a couple of years since then, and so ghouls have sort of reassimilated into society thanks to something called synflesh, creatively named synthetic human flesh. That allows them to basically eat that and then carry on with their lives. They have to log in an app when they eat and stuff like that. So they're still being monitored and tracked, but they can live relatively normal lives. So these 4 girls, after graduating from high school, are let's go do one last hurrah as sort of our way of putting the past behind us, putting this sort of semi-apocalypse that happened in the past and just sort of move ahead as if nothing happened. And then unfortunately things continue to be a problem because they get to the festival and one of them goes feral and accidentally kills and eats a member of a boy band.
Which is not that big of a problem if you think about it.
Yeah, honestly, I think that Val was doing a service. Maybe I think she was right to do it. She didn't know it at the time, but in retrospect, it was I don't know, he kind of deserved it. So they have to figure out what caused Val to go feral before essentially the same thing happens to other ghouls at the festival and it turns into a total bloodbath. They have to build a mystery.
So We Don't Swim Here is about a pair of cousins. One cousin is named Bronwyn. She's from Chicago. And because of her grandmother's failing health, she has to move all the way back to her dad's hometown in Arkansas. The other cousin is Anais, and she's lived in the town all her life. Bronwyn keeps getting a lot of weird feelings about all of the, all of the residents there. Everyone is very cryptic about, why we don't swim here. That is the one phrase that she keeps hearing. Even though there are several pools and like even a really gorgeous lake, everyone's just like, we don't swim here. And Anais is also not any sort of help. She's not telling her what's going on. And so as the two continue to butt heads, Bronwyn starts to kind of accidentally unearth this mystery and also sort of helps bring this ghost come into full power to exact some revenge on a lot of the different residents. If you're into black girls getting revenge, I would strongly recommend this.
The ghost was right.
The ghost was right.
There's not spoilers. The ghost is always right.
Sweetie did nothing wrong.
That's right. I hope you can make a t-shirt or something.
I actually tried once. For some reason, Redbubble shut down my account. They were just like, "Oh, this is based off a book." I'm like, "The book I wrote. This is my property." I tried.
And La Boca del Lobo is about a young girl who is going back to her family home that is in the mountains of Jayuya that they haven't gone back to in 5 years because when she was a little girl, she accidentally disappeared for an entire night and people didn't know where she was, and then she sort of just reappeared in a field. And still from that day, she's had weird memories and interactions with shadows and stuff like that. So eventually they do return, and the things that had started that night 5 years ago kick back into gear. So that's the show. I think we have a couple of minutes left, so if there are any audience questions, we will happily take them. If not, I can ask you about your favorite and least favorite horror tropes. It's time to get destroy these horror tropes. What, you fell in a forest? How dare you?
I have a funny story about that, actually. If no one has questions, I will just tell stories. So when I was older than that traumatic daycare experience, but still very young, I think I might have been around 10 or 11. I was very big into Halloween stories, Halloween Town, that was my stuff. And I was at my babysitter's house, and I'm just scrolling through the channels, and I'm just it's October. I hope there's some good Halloween specials. And then I go onto a channel that says, "Hey, we're watching Halloween." And I'm like, "Oh, cool! That's totally something that I'd be into." And I think the crazier part about this is I watched, what was his name? Michael Myers? Yeah, Michael Myers, he's just walking calmly through this forest. And these teens are "Oh no, we have to run, as fast as we can." And they get to this door, and the door isn't opening. And they're just "Oh, come on, open the door," or whatever. And the guy is still walking. He's just kind of calmly
slowly
put some pep in your step,
dude.
No,
he's just walking, and I'm just kind of okay. And then he gets there way faster than anyone who was walking should have. For years afterwards, I wrongly believed he had the ability to teleport. Because that was the only way that could make sense. So in my mind, I'm just oh, okay, so he just walks to freak you out, and then he teleports when he has to. Yeah, that makes total sense. And then I rewatched the movies later. I was just man, this is not right. He does not teleport.
He's just very good at preparing the area. He was locking all of those doors beforehand.
Yeah, unfortunately, he twisted his ankle, and so it was a lot of just kind of I'll get him eventually.
Would you like to talk about the tropes that you love and hate?
Sure. I think that in terms of tropes that I really like is I'm always a sucker for there's something in the woods. Mm-hmm. The second you look at a bunch of trees, you're there probably is something in there. Yeah. So I think that that's just one of those age-old human fears that always works. And then in terms of least favorite tropes, I guess this is a little bit of a cop-out to say, but the Lovecraftian approach to creating monsters, which is just, I'm scared of minorities. That sucks. Not a fan.
Yeah, unsubscribe to Lovecraft. You can just let him go.
It doesn't happen often, but I do love the revenge aspect of certain horror movies. Again, it doesn't happen that often because they're always trying to teach oh, revenge is bad or whatever. And I'm just to me, this is everything to me. And you
balance.
Yeah, you mentioned
balance.
Guillermo del Toro.
Yeah.
It reminds me of the Cabinet of Curiosities. Mm-hmm. And the very first episode, you see this dickhead of a dude who's just being an absolute he's just mean as hell because he's a typical, I think, white veteran. where so he's a white veteran, and he's like, he just has he has a weird hang up about minorities in general. You kind of like see it slowly, and then at the very end, and he's just trying to get out of, a place that's being locked, and the one minority he was being a dick to passes by, and she's just like, damn, that's crazy. Anyways. Yeah. And I'm just like, yeah, this is my jam. Like, I love this. He got what's coming to him. That's my favorite trope whatsoever. It doesn't happen often, but it's great when it does. Least favorite is like, I hate it when like they just kind of try to make you feel bad for the sake of feeling bad, where it's just like, oh, and nothing was ever right in the world ever again. I was just like, yeah, because you put this out here. That's on you. So I don't like it when there's like not a satisfying ending, because they're just like, oh, it's a horror story. It's not meant to end well. I'm just like, okay, just say that you don't have the talent to make it end well. I don't know.
Just say you signed a 2-movie deal.
Right.
And the
just
second
say
one's
that.
coming
Like,
out next year.
You couldn't hack it. It's fine. Just say that. But don't sit here and tell me, oh, the way reality works. This isn't reality. This is something you made. You could have made it like end differently. I don't care.
I agree on both of your points. I love it when the seen as weak person or something like that suddenly like bonds with the evil monster and is like, guess who has the power now? And I'm like,
I have
you
incredible
do.
news for you. Jessica Lewis has a book coming out called Monstrous. That's literally the plot of it. It's so good. Absolutely fantastic.
That actually kicks me into my next question of what have you been reading or watching that you would recommend people dive into after reading your book, of course. You were just talking about one that you were going to blurb.
Oh, yes. So I got to read The Spirit Bears Its Teeth by A.J. White while I was on the train here, and I was going absolutely insane on the train. I was like crying a little bit, but then also like, oh my God, he put a C-section in there, the absolute madman. It's so good.
The looks on everybody's faces is like,
it's
nope.
Fantastic. So highly recommend if you're somebody who likes ghost stories and also just artfully described body horror. Like, Andrew Joseph White is a king when it comes to it, and it's fantastic.
You mentioned that you blurbed it, and it just reminded me of, unfortunately, Ryan LaSala isn't here, but I got to blurb his upcoming novel, Beholder. And I love Beholder for many reasons. One, I love the fact that like this whole story, though being about teenagers, they are not once in school. These kids have not graced the hallways of a school at any point. And I think that is so badass of him to do that, because I'm too afraid that.
Was it the summer? No?
I
It was
don't
just
even-
like, they're just not there.
They're just not there. Like,
They're
I
just
don't.
not feeling it.
No, well, one of the characters, I believe, like dropped out of high school, which, like, to me, I think that. Like, yes, of course, we tell kids, you should graduate high school or like go off to college. You should have these big dreams or whatever. But that's not always feasible. And I still feel like kids who for one reason or another do drop out of high school or like they don't go to college, I feel like they should still get to see themselves in a book, like being the heroes. Yeah. But also I super love the book because it answers the question, what if gaslighting was a monster? And it's so, so good.
Okay, I
also,
love that.
you will never be able to look in a mirror ever again. You're gonna like start gaslighting yourself just off that experience. It's great.
That's a horror
That has to
trope
be the
I love.
tagline.
It's the classic, like, time to look in the mirror. Uh-oh, behind me? So good. Works every time.
Also, if you do like that, there is clearly something in the woods. Ryan's The Honeys is very much that, where you just like just don't go into the woods again, sort of thing. Oh my God, what is the last thing? Well, all 4 of your books were amazing, and they were like different. I loved how it just like fit into different pockets of horror, like comedy and horror, like monster horror, because you had ghouls, and ghouls fall into the monster horror, like psychological horror, like gore and all that stuff, and all these wonderful categories. So it was really awesome just to like see all of the ways that y'all are like playing with the genre and like really thriving. So it was amazing, and I encourage you to gather all of their books either today so you can get them signed or from your local library. I think we're at time. I can't remember. I think we were until 12:10. Are we at time? We're at time by the second. So come over and get your book signed or say hello, and we would love to hear what you love about horror as well. So thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.